"You better see Miss Schiller," she said without rancor. Adopting the customary compromise of untrained domestics, she did not invite him inside, but departed, leaving the door open to show that there was no ill will. Aubrey stepped into the hall and closed the door behind him. In an immense mirror the pale cheese-colored flutter of a gas jet was remotely reflected. He noticed the Landseer engraving hung against wall-paper designed in a facsimile of large rectangles of gray stone, and the usual telephone memorandum for the usual Mrs. J. F. Smith, who abides in all lodging-houses, tucked into the frame of the mirror. "Will Mrs. Smith please call Stockton 6771," it said. A carpeted stair with a fine old mahogany balustrade rose into the dimness. Aubrey, who was thoroughly familiar with lodgings, knew instinctively that the 4th, 9th, 10th, and 14th steps would be creakers. A soft musk sweetened the warm, torpid air. He divined that someone was toasting marshmallows over a gas jet. He knew perfectly well that somewhere in the house would be a placard over a bathtub with the legend, "Please leave this tub as you would wish to find it." Roger Mifflin would have said, after studying the hall, that someone in the house was sure to be reading the poems of Rabbi Tagore, but Aubrey was not so caustic. Mrs. Schiller came up the basement stairs, followed by a small pug dog. She was warm and stout, with a tendency to burst just under the armpits. She was friendly. The pug made merry over Aubrey's ankles. "Stop it, Treasure," said Mrs. Schiller. "Can I get a room here?" asked Aubrey with great politeness. "Third floor front's the only thing I've got," she said. "You don't smoke in bed, do you? The last man I had burned holes in 3 of my sheets." Aubrey reassured her. "I don't give meals." "That's all right," said Aubrey. "Suits me." $5 a week," she said. "May I see it?" Mrs. Schiller brightened the gas and led the way upstairs. Treasure skipped up the treads beside her. The sight of the 6 feet ascending together amused Aubrey. The 4th, 9th, 10th, and 14th steps creaked, as he had guessed they would. On the landing of the second story a transom gushed orange light. Mrs. Schiller was secretly pleased at not having to augment the gas on that landing. Under the transom and behind a door, Aubrey could hear someone having a bath, with a great sloshing of water. He wondered irreverently whether it was Mrs. J. F. Smith. At any rate, he felt sure, it was some experienced habitué of lodgings, who knew that about 5:30 in the afternoon is the best time for a bath, before cooking supper and the homecoming ablutions of other tenants have exhausted the hot water boiler. They climbed one more flight. The room was small, occupying half the third-floor frontage. A large window opened onto the street, giving a plain view of the bookshop and the other houses across the way. A washstand stood modestly inside a large cupboard. Over the mantel was the familiar picture, usually, however, reserved for the 4th floor back, of a young lady having her shoes shined by a ribald small boy. Aubrey was delighted. "This is fine," he said. "Here's a week in advance." Mrs. Schiller was almost disconcerted by the rapidity of the transaction. She preferred to solemnize the reception of a new lodger by a little more talk, remarks about the weather, the difficulty of getting help, the young women guests who empty tea leaves down wash-basin pipes, and so on. All this sort of gossip, apparently aimless, has a very real purpose. It enables the defenseless landlady to size up the stranger who comes to prey upon her. She had hardly had a good look at this gentleman, nor even knew his name, and here he had paid a week's rent and was already installed. Aubrey divined the cause of her hesitation and gave her his business card. "All right, Mr. Gilbert," she said. "I'll send up the girl with some clean towels and a latchkey." Aubrey sat down in a rocking chair by the window, tucked the muslin curtain to one side, and looked out upon the bright channel of Gissing Street. He was full of the exhilaration that springs from any change of abode, but his romantic satisfaction in being so close to the adorable Titania was somewhat marred by a sense of absurdity, which is feared by young men more than wounds and death. He could see the lighted windows of the haunted bookshop quite plainly, but he could not think of any adequate excuse for going over there. And already he realized that to be near Miss Chapman was not at all the consolation he had expected it would be. He had a powerful desire to see her. He turned off the gas, lit his pipe, opened the window, and focused the opera glasses on the door of the bookshop. It brought the place tantalizingly near. He could see the table at the front of the shop, Roger's bulletin board under the electric light, and 1 or 2 nondescript customers gleaning along the shelves. Then something bounded violently under the 3rd button of his shirt. There she was! In the bright, prismatic little circle of the lenses he could see Titania. Heavenly creature, in her white V-necked blouse and brown skirt. There she was, looking at a book. He saw her put out one arm and caught the twinkle of her wristwatch. In the startling familiarity of the magnifying glass he could see her bright, unconscious face, the merry profile of her cheek and chin. "The idea of that girl working in a second-hand bookstore!" he exclaimed. "It's positive sacrilege. Old man Chapman must be crazy." He took out his pajamas and threw them on the bed, put his toothbrush and razor on the wash basin, laid hairbrushes and O. Henry on the bureau. Feeling rather serio-comic, he loaded his small revolver and hipped it. It was 6 o'clock and he wound his watch. He was a little uncertain what to do, whether to keep a vigil at the window with the opera glasses or go down in the street where he could watch the bookshop more nearly. In the excitement of the adventure he had forgotten all about the cut on his scalp, and felt quite chipper. In leaving Madison Avenue he had attempted to excuse the preposterousness of his excursion by thinking that a quiet weekend in Brooklyn would give him an opportunity to jot down some tentative ideas for Daintybit's advertising copy which he planned to submit to his chief on Monday. But now that he was here, he felt the impossibility of attacking any such humdrum task. How could he sit down in cold blood to devise any attention-compelling layouts for Daintybit's tapioca and Chapman's cherished Saratoga chips, when the daintiest bit of all was only a few yards away? For the first time was made plain to him the amazing power of young women to interfere with the legitimate commerce of the world. He did get so far as to take out his pad of writing paper and jot down Chapman's cherished chips. These delicate wafers, crisped by a secret process, cherish in their unique tang and flavor all the life-giving nutriment that has made the potato the king of vegetables. But the face of Miss Titania kept coming between his hand and brain. Of what avail to flood the world with Chapman's chips if the girl herself should come to any harm? Was this the face that launched 1,000 chips? He murmured, and for an instant wished he had brought the Oxford Book of English Verse instead of O. Henry. A tap sounded at his door, and Mrs. Schiller appeared. "Telephone for you, Mr. Gilbert," she said. "For me?" said Aubrey in amazement. How could it be for him, he thought, for no one knew he was there. "The party on the wire asked to speak to the gentleman who arrived about half an hour ago, and I guess you must be the one he means." "Did he say who he is?" asked Aubrey. "No, sir." For a moment Aubrey thought of refusing to answer the call. Then it occurred to him that this would arouse Mrs. Schiller's suspicions. He ran down to the telephone, which stood under the stairs in the front hall. "Hello?" he said. "Is this the new guest?" said a voice, a deep, gargling kind of voice. "Yes," said Aubrey. "Is this the gentleman that arrived half an hour ago with the handbag?" "Yes. Who are you?" "I'm a friend," said the voice. "I wish you well." "How do you do, friend and well-wisher?" said Aubrey genially. "I just want to warn you that Gissing Street is not healthy for you," said the voice. "Is that so?" said Aubrey sharply. "Who are you?" "I am a friend," buzzed the receiver. There was a harsh, bass note in the voice that made the diaphragm at Aubrey's ear vibrate tinnily. Aubrey grew angry. "Well, Herr Freund," he said, "if you're the well-wisher I met on the bridge last night, watch your step. I've got your number." There was a pause. Then the other repeated ponderously, "I am a friend. Gissing Street is not healthy for you." There was a click, and he had rung off. Aubrey was a good deal perplexed. He returned to his room and sat in the dark by the window, smoking a pipe and thinking, with his eyes on the bookshop. There was no longer any doubt in his mind that something sinister was afoot. He reviewed in memory the events of the past few days. It was on Monday that a book-loving friend had first told him of the existence of the shop on Gissing Street. On Tuesday evening he had gone round to visit the place, and had stayed to supper with Mr. Mifflin. On Wednesday and Thursday he had been busy at the office, and the idea of an intensive Daintybit campaign in Brooklyn had occurred to him. On Friday he had dined with Mr. Chapman, and had run into a curious string of coincidences. He tabulated them. 1. The lost ad in the Times on Friday morning. 2. The chef in the elevator carrying the book that was supposed to be lost, he being the same man Aubrey had seen in the bookshop on Tuesday evening. 3. Seeing the chef again on Gissing Street. 4. The return of the book to the bookshop. 5. Mifflin had said that the book had been stolen from him. Then why should it be either advertised or returned? 6. The rebinding of the book. 7. Finding the original cover of the book in Weintraub's drugstore. 8. The affair on the bridge. 9. The telephone message from a friend with an obviously Teutonic voice.